Let me introduce Peter Silica, and he's going to get us started with his presentation. Peter, it's all yours.
Thanks very much, Lauren. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I see we have people beginning to join, which is great. I'm Peter Silica. I run a small consultancy focusing on sustainability, business process improvement, and environmental policy, among other items. I've been doing consulting work in this field for quite a long time, coming up on 29 years. Recognizing that sustainability as an idea has been around for decades, it really is beginning to take hold in leading corporations and, interestingly, also in a number of important public sector institutions. So I think that its time has come. It's important, and there's increasing recognition of this importance. It's rapidly evolving. There are new activities, initiatives, tools, learnings, and the like emerging, it seems, on a monthly basis. And so there's tremendous interest and activity in this area, but at the same time, it's my own view, at least, that taking on some of these issues is intrinsically difficult, and one needs to take some approaches to work in this field that maybe are a little bit different than the way organizations typically behave and do things, and requires some specific skill sets that I will get into in just a minute. Setting the stage here and understanding why this sort of work is difficult, I wanted to review a few key challenges. I think we have to start with the understanding that sustainability, or improvement of along any of the major three dimensions of sustainability thinking, is generally not the overall objective of most organizations. Companies have missions, whether it's producing automobiles or jet airplanes, or providing banking services. There is generally nothing in their mission that is really tied to sustainability per se. And so as a consequence, it may be a little bit difficult getting people in leadership positions to focus on this as an objective, or something that they really need to pay attention to. There are also a number of practical challenges given the multidisciplinary nature, or multifunctional nature of most or many sustainability issues. And these include the limited control and influence that any one person or even department can wield in addressing these issues. I think, generally recognize that many organizations have silos, or operate semi-autonomously with very little interchange across functions. There is diffuse responsibility and a lack of incentives in some cases for people to take these issues on. And decentralization it can be a contributing factor to getting people all on the same page and pulling together to make improvements. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, we have to recognize the inertia that, or resistance to change, that exists within many organizations, and that I would argue is a facet of human nature that we have to recognize and overcome. So I'm going to suggest a few tactics that I have found useful in addressing these challenges and helping to overcome them. Starting with a couple that really speak to the human element, and beginning with really meeting people where they are. We all bring our own experiences, educational background, values, and thinking to issues, and it is important in doing work of this nature, and particularly in a consultative sort of role, to understand the way people are thinking, listen actively to what they tell you, try to pick up on the visual cues as you're able, and tailor your approach and how you relate to folks based upon where they are. Another aspect of this is that I believe is important, is to recognize that many people have an emotional attachment to environmental, social, and other sustainability issues. And while it's appropriate to recognize these emotional attachments, it's important to maintain some distance and to bring a fact-based approach to the work that you do. It simply will not stand up to scrutiny and, in my experience, survive or succeed if you don't have your facts lined up and you don't do careful analysis. Another aspect is to consider all of the players, and this is really at the root of stakeholder engagement concepts. There are stakeholders both within the organization that you're working in or for, and stakeholders outside the organization. And it's important to recognize who those players are, and whether they're actively involved or not, they may still have influence. And this is where you get into coaches. Coaches can both help and enable and stymie and ultimately defeat efforts to bring about sustainability activities and attain goals. Many of the ideas that one may bring to bear in working with an organization involve doing something different, thinking differently, acting differently, trying new approaches. Very often, people and organizations are resistant to those ideas, and I've found that you have to sort of play the long game in many cases, and you do that by introducing your ideas and suggestions and trying to socialize them, sometimes with a limited group of people, sometimes with a plan to kind of start small, get people accepting of it, recruit some people that have some influence that you can bring around your point of view, and then try to infuse the new thinking into the organization. If you just try to kind of launch it, announce it, roll it out, very often that leads to failure. And then finally, life is full of surprises, and certainly work in this area brings along unexpected events and reactions from people. And it's important in doing this kind of work to be on the lookout for opportunities that you didn't anticipate or changing conditions that might open up some new ways of thinking or chances that you didn't have previously. So that's kind of the general list. What I'm going to do now is share a few examples from my own experience that help to illustrate the use of some of these approaches and what has happened in my own career. This was concerned a proposed composting facility that was going to go in, and our company had been retained to do some of the required studies to get it sited and permitted and all the rest of it. A lot of groundwork had been done on this. It had been zoned correctly. Things were moving along. And then it turned out that right across the street was an elementary school. And when the principal of this elementary school learned about this plan, he went absolutely ballistic and organized a campaign, started making lots of public statements, organizing parents and teachers and anybody who would listen to oppose this project. And the long and the short of it is that the developer ultimately backed off after trying to appease this individual and explain why the plan posed no danger to the school or its students. They withdrew the project and it died. This was an early illustration for me of the importance of good stakeholder engagement and the reality that power is sometimes wielded by people who have no explicit authority whatsoever. This man was able to kill this project that would have produced some environmental benefits and on balance was very unlikely to pose any hazards at all to those in his charge. But that didn't matter. He was committed, and once again, we're talking about young school children, and there are probably few issues that will stir the emotions more than the safety and well-being of our children. So Word to the wise, this is the sort of situation in which it's really important to understand the different layers of a project or an initiative, and to really be aware that you need to tread carefully. Next, perhaps a little bit more uplifting example, I started a project with a corporate environment, health, and safety executive to develop basically a management framework for his company, which was loosely affiliated with the chemical industry. They were in the plastics end of it. And we began the engagement, and he sort of gave me, shared with me an interesting example of how things were changing in this company. He had a sit down with their new CEO, who had come from another company in the industry, and proudly explained that the company's safety practices had improved quite a bit, and their numbers had improved dramatically. The number of injuries and fatalities had diminished by 2/3. And he got an interesting reaction from the CEO, who said, "So you're telling me that more than likely we're going to kill 2 of our employees this year? Are you really okay with that? Are you telling me that you're proud that that's where we are, and that this is sort of our plan for the year?" And my client was, of course, shocked to hear this sort of response. But they talked it through and identified some additional steps that could be taken to embrace emerging best practices in worker safety, and that, if anything, really gave us the confidence to march out the management approach that we were beginning to formulate. What I take away from this is that you can really help yourself if you learn as much as you can about the senior decision makers in the organization you're working with. There's in the internet age, there is lots of information out there on websites. You can learn a lot from reviewing public remarks and presentations made by senior leadership, by reading the organization's strategy documents, and the like. And that may suggest some ways in which you can find opportunities and craft arguments that will be compelling. I also think it's important in doing this kind of work both to be ready for skepticism and defense of parochial interests, but I think you really do need to speak to people's better nature. My own view and my career experience has done nothing to invalidate this, is that people do want to do the right thing. They do want the world to be a better place. They do want to be successful. They do want to do meaningful work and provide a good environment for their people. And so by exploring some of these issues and putting them on the table, sometimes you can pick up support from places where you might not expect it. And certainly if you do get that support, you want to try to leverage that and work it within reason as aggressively as you can, because that senior management support is vitally important in making things happen. Let me move on to another example. Some years ago, I was brought in to do a pretty simple assignment. This was a big utility and energy company that had found itself in a place where their far-flung operations were running into environmental issues, and they needed a consistent story to tell. They needed some guidance to provide to individual business unit managers around the country, expressing the company's position on a variety of different public policies and environmental issues. So they had prepared what amounted to a matrix articulating some of these policies and providing the kind of the facts that these managers could use. So they asked me to review it and provide any suggestions, which I did. That was easy enough, but I thought about it a little bit, and then I kind of took a chance. I had enough remaining budget to do a little extra work, and so I did. And what I ended up doing was developing a a policy setting framework that would enable the individual manager to kind of understand and articulate the core. Just one second. My office phone is ringing and I need to mute it. Sorry about that. In any event, I decided that having this simple, or it's fairly lengthy set of tables would not be very useful to a business decision maker who really has little or no interest in or knowledge of environmental issues. They just need to know what to do and how to do it. And so I rethought it and developed this framework, basically a flow chart to help them develop policy positions that would be consistent with the overall corporate direction, but allow for tailoring at the individual level, because which was important because their businesses really were regulated at the state level, and every state has a different approach. So over time, I was able to develop this thing. When I presented it to the kind of the boss's boss of my immediate client, who was an executive in the company, she loved it because it was really tied into the company's overall strategy and core values and lines of business and business objectives. And from there, we took it to the full EHS staff, and from there they took it to the board of directors, and it was adopted by the board and by the company at large. So what I got out of that was I was feeling pretty good about it. The takeaways are that it's important to really understand what the real need is and carefully diagnose the issue or problem that you're given. In doing so, it's very helpful to try to understand who's going to be affected, whether it's a user of a policy or process or a broader array of stakeholders. Understand what they're going to do with it and how it may affect them and what they do. Testing the boundaries is something that I like to do. It does involve taking on some risk, but this is not a field I would venture for the corporate wallflower or the faint of heart. This is difficult work, and sometimes you really do need to pose questions or test the limits of what you can do. Innovation is important. This is an emerging field. There are lots of novel solutions needed to solve some of these difficult problems, and folks should not be shy about developing new ideas and trying them out and seeing how well they work. And then finally, in the process of shepherding this new framework through the various people and organizations that needed to endorse it, I found myself in a couple of cases confronted with some suggestions or changes promoted by different people that in my own view did not enhance the quality or utility of the product, but which I agreed to simply because the person who was advocating the changes was fairly powerful and somebody that I wanted on my side and not in opposition. So sometimes you do have to make some compromises, and you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, because at the end of the day, you need to get things done, even if they're not exactly your own grand design. I have one more, but I see we're about halfway through our time, so maybe I'll stop there, and we can have some discussion. Before I do that, just a few thoughts, and maybe this will sort of tee up the discussion. Some skills and personal attributes that I've found to be useful in doing this sort of work. One is strategic thinking. As I've mentioned before, a lot of these issues are complex and multidimensional. You really need to need to be looking out at the horizon and examining the big picture and devising solutions at that level. There are a lot of moving parts to sustainability issues, and so it's important to bring to bear the technical expertise that's needed and an understanding of the different functions that exist within most organizations. No one person is likely to have all of this expertise and understanding, and so it's important to enlist the help and the cooperation of people who do. And that leads one to multidisciplinary project teams or multidisciplinary teams that are ongoing to manage some of this work. There are a lot of competing ideas and facts, whether justified or perceptual, and certainly a lot of statistics and opinion out there. So it's important to be able to sort through all that and bring some critical thinking and analytical skills to the party. Given that you're often working in groups, you need to have good team building and leadership skills if you want to be at running the show, and communication skills are really vital, both at sort of a small group level and beyond, because these issues are complex. They're not really in the domain of many people that will want to weigh in, and you have to be able to communicate effectively. And along with that, given that you're typically in multiple areas of organizational turf, you're probably not going to have direct authority over all the things that need to get done or decisions that need to get made. And so you need to be able to influence people without having explicit authority. And as a consultant, that's the world you live in all the time. In terms of personal attributes, I'm a naturally curious person, and I'm always learning new things, though my formal education is many years in the past. And that is an attribute that I think has been very helpful to me. The issues, again, are multidimensional, and so you have to be open to learning new things and accepting the limits of your own existing knowledge. And you know, for what it's worth, that helps, at least for me, to keep it fresh, keep it interesting, make me want to continue to do it. We're dealing with important issues fundamentally, and you're going to be a lot more convincing and enlist people to work with you if you bring a strong personal integrity to the work. You call them as you see them. You collect your facts. You respect other people's opinions and interests. You do sound analysis. That really is what it takes. And certainly, if you're going to be influential in any big organization, they're just not going to trust you. They're not going to give you responsibility if you don't have integrity. You also have to be willing to stick to your guns, articulate your point of view, and maintain it even in the face of skepticism. That is going to be almost inevitable, and so you really need to be willing to to put up with the resistance that you're going to get. At the same time, it's important to be open-minded, listen to people. And when they're reacting to what you say, you can often learn a lot that way. And flexibility is the way to get things done, because you're almost always dealing with multiple interests that may be in conflict, and you just have to be open to new ways of thinking and doing things yourself. And then finally, it helps to have some empathy, putting yourself in the shoes of the people you're working with and that would be affected by what you want to do. If you do that, you're more likely to come up with good solutions that are embraced and adopted within the organization. So I will leave it there. Some of my thinking on this, for anybody that's interested, is contained in a couple of books that I've written that go back a couple of years now, and my contact information is here. Welcome any questions, commentary, suggestions from anybody on or listening to the call. So let's now open it up for discussion and see where we go.
So thank you, Peter. That was really quite useful, and I agree with everything that you said. It all makes sense. two things. One, you mentioned that you'd done a review of the literature. I presume you were talking about the business case for sustainability kind of literature?
Yes, most of it is in the form of academic studies that have been done trying to understand the relationship between corporate behavioral change and financial impact.
Okay.
Whether it's the sorts of impacts you might see on an income statement or balance sheet, or the value assigned to the company in the marketplace, looking at equity price changes and things of that nature. There are a variety of different threads that have been examined, and most or all of them, to my knowledge, point in the same direction, which is do this well, and you'll actually benefit from it.
Absolutely. No, I agree. So you're saying that this literature review that you have done is in the second book that you've put out?
Yes.
So I could, if I get that, I would get access to that literature review as well?
Yeah, Chapter 7.
Chapter 7. Okay. So here's the thing. I'd like to make a distinction between three things. Leadership, true leadership, change management, and decision making. And there's a distinction there, I think, that's worth keeping in mind. A lot of what you were talking about and the skills and attitudes that you were talking about, in my opinion, relate more to the management of change processes. The kind of skills that you would need to be a facilitator of a decision-making process, more than what would be the right word to use? Inspirational leadership.
I think that's probably fair. If I think about this for a moment, and maybe this is sort of obvious or self-evident, the sort of role that I've been playing for lo these many years has primarily been as the kind of external analyst, advisor, problem solver, facilitator, that sort of thing. And that's the I would say the typical consultative role.
Okay.
I also have had leadership experience as well, and those sorts of attitudes and behaviors are very important to bringing about sustainability in an organization. But I think your observation is apt, that in what I've suggested in my remarks today, I have really been focusing on the change management piece and at least the activities that could inform better decision making.
Okay. Okay. I agree with everything that you've said, and there's no real question that the skills that you're talking about are essential. If there's a piece that I struggle with is how to bring graduate students particularly, but undergraduate students as well, to a place where they begin to appreciate this. And I agree with your strategy of telling stories as a way of making these skills apparent. But behind the skills that you listed in your final 2 slides of attributes and skills and so on, are there worldviews you have found that are more useful than others to this change management process?
I bring to this my own worldview, which is based upon my training in science. I did my undergraduate work in zoology and environmental studies, and so understanding the kind of the scientific basis of concerns about the health of the environment and impacts on human health and quality of life and those sorts of things is sort of animates my own worldview of this, and causes me, I think, to focus on those sorts of endpoints from a from a practical point of view, I also will say that, sort of speaking at a very personal level, though I am not an actively religious person, I did have the sort of traditional conservative, relatively conservative Christian upbringing that many people in this country have had, and as part of that, I look to the lessons in the Christian faith having to do with stewardship of what you've been given, and the importance of taking care of yourself, of your family, of your community, and not squandering the whatever bounty you may receive, and ensuring that you're not doing anything that really will undermine the success of those to come by the decisions you make.
Yeah, this was one thing that was sort of the gist of my question at the very beginning about establishing some sort of standard, a communication standard, when we're referring to these issues. Mm-hmm. So, like you said, you do have different disciplines that are coming at this from different angles. Somebody who does have those essential skill sets that you discussed, like empathy, being able to understand, for me, natural capital and the financial aspect of sustainability is something that, regardless of our discipline, we all deal with that. To me, that seems to be a very common basis that everybody can understand. And plus, when you look at it, sustainability is, in its nature, an economic problem. If we run our economy differently, we shift that, we solve a lot of the sustainability problems.
Showing them that individual decisions begin to add up to collective decisions becomes the biggest challenge that I face in teaching sustainability. When it comes to leadership issues, I'm less concerned with sustainability leadership and more with change management. That's the piece that I'm more interested in.
I can tell you there are numerous sets of materials out there that have been developed that include very extensive participation. I mean, in fact, that's how they're sort of based around the idea of activities. Getting, whether it's school children or college students, to take on an issue or a scenario and work through it in either small or large groups, and assume these types of roles and actually model the behaviors that would be needed to arrive at a collective decision. So I think that that is really the key to success. You can talk about this stuff as long as you want, but until they actually take it on and work through it and use it, I think it's very difficult to impart that kind of knowledge and develop that kind of skill.
Right, I would think that things like internships and having a close relationship with the business community, for example, would be very useful as well to give students that practical type of experience. For those of you watching online, thank you very much for hanging out with us today. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.